Okay, good morning, everyone. So it's nice to see you all and some fresh faces as well. So if you're wondering why I'm all rugged up while you guys are sweltering in the heat, I'm in Sydney at the moment and we're in the thick of winter. So we've actually got a cold snap coming through at the moment as well. So let me just share my screen. Okay. All right. Can you all see the screen there?
Yes.
Let me move this away. Okay. Okay, so formally, I'd like to say good morning to you all from Sydney. It's really nice to see you all again. And I know I've been saying this ever since COVID started, but hopefully, hopefully next year we can all meet in person like the good old days at Bodhi Monastery. And as Faye said, if I was over there, I would not have fallen over and broken my ankle. But having, these past few years of turbulence, it's actually a very good opportunity for us as Buddhist practitioners to use that time to reflect. And more so, it's to reflect on our own practice and how well we have actually applied the Dharma that we have learned into our daily lives. First of all, first and foremost, the pandemic, which forced us to change our normal routines. So we've got really different styles of working nowadays. There's a lot more working from home, working remotely. Some people like it, some people don't like it. But the lockdowns and so forth, it's really like impermanence hitting us smack in the face. How did we deal with it? Were we able to deal with it in a wholesome way? And then you have the various natural disasters, the significant bushfires, both here in Australia and in the US, and then the flooding, the earthquakes and the famine and so forth. And then, of course, we had the human-made disasters of both military and economic conflicts that are still occurring now. And when we think about it, the start of the 2020s, this decade, is already so volatile and challenging. But how have we dealt with it? Through these times, we should reflect on our mind and our reactions. Were we able to maintain calm and grow our compassion and wisdom as we faced these forced changes? Were we taken away by our emotions? Did we allow our emotions to get caught up in the roller coaster of these last few years? Such reflections are a good way to actually measure how well we have progressed in our own practice. So someone who has practiced and applied what they've learnt about the Dharma in their daily lives, you should have been able to meet with the forced lockdowns in a calm manner and understand that it's for the betterment of everyone. There are people who complain. There are people over here who, being forced to lock down in their 5-bedroom homes with a nice backyard and a pool and internet, and they're complaining, I can't go out with my friends. So if you had that type of a gripe, maybe we need to reflect, well, where did my compassion go? Where did my kindness go? Where did my willingness for the betterment of others to sacrifice a little bit of my freedom go? So these are all, especially in times of hardship, we can see actually how well we have developed the virtues of compassion, tolerance, patience, and so forth, and how much of our anger, frustration, and even selfishness that we have been able to tame. So all in all, these past few years have been challenging, and I hope that as you continue to learn the Dharma, you can practice it well. And no matter what challenges come in the next few years, we can all meet with it with a calm and compassionate mind. And so that's why this year, my topic is called The Significance of Learning the Dharma. And the content here follows on from last year's talk, which is, last year we talked about taking refuge in the Triple Gem. So that was from Venerable Yin-Shun's teaching, The Way to Buddhahood, Chapter 1. And this year we continue with that book, The Way to Buddhahood, Chapter 2. So just a bit of a recap, and for those who are new to us this year. Last year, we looked at the meaning of taking refuge, the benefits of taking refuge, and the method or ceremonial procedure regarding taking refuge in the Triple Gem. But simply taking refuge doesn't guarantee us a direct entrance to the Pure Land, and nor are we guaranteed a good rebirth in every future life. Taking refuge is an important start on our path of the practice, but we need to progress on this path, and we need to both learn the Dharma and practice it in order to progress. Now, at the Bodhi Monastery and the Yin-Shun Foundation teachings that are held every year, you'll always hear the teachers reminding everyone to learn and practice the Dharma. You need to learn and practice the Dharma. And whenever I used to hear Dharma teachings as a layperson, and the teachers would tell me, we need to learn and practice the Dharma, I used to take it as a bit of a no-brainer until someone asked me, how do I learn the Dharma? Where do I start? And it was then that it occurred to me that perhaps clearer instructions are needed, as not everyone knows how to go about learning the Dharma. And luckily for us, we have Venerable Yin-Shun and the teachings he's left behind for us, which give us a lot of guidance about how to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. And through his own experience of learning the Dharma, we can also get an idea of how we can go about learning the Dharma. So first of all, learning the Dharma is not like learning an ordinary subject. However, I do like to think of it a bit like maths. So first in school, primary and high school level, when we begin to learn maths, we start with, well, here in Australia, my experience is in primary school, we started with memorizing our times table from 0 up to 13. So having memorized those, we then began with learning and practicing how to add and subtract, multiply and divide. And then as we go into the more senior years and then into high school, we learn different formulas and so forth. Now, when I started learning algebra, I used to think, why do I need this? What's this X doing here? What's this Y doing there? And then when we were learning calculus and integration, as easy as it was, I always thought, what's the use of calculus? Am I ever going to need it? And granted that for many of us in our daily lives, we don't use calculus and integration all the time. But there are many other aspects of maths that are actually woven into our daily lives. And the most basic is when we go shopping, we have to budget our finances, whether we realize it or not. We're using the maths that we have learnt from school. And if you like to build things and create things, you need to be able to use the various formulas relating to squares, circles, and different shapes to calculate how much material you need and so forth. And so for many of us who use that on a daily basis, it becomes second nature. We actually don't have to look back into the textbook for the formula. It just comes to us and we start calculating. So this is where maths as a subject becomes alive and merged with our existence. So if we can approach the learning of the Dharma in a similar way, then we don't actually have to force ourselves to remember what we've learned because it's immersed as part of our livelihood. So for example, at the start, we can approach the Dharma teachings more like a subject. So we start with learning the basics and the core teachings. We can read through the Agamas and the Nikayas, as well as the Vinaya. And I'd like to stress the Vinaya because for many people, when they start to learn about Buddhism, they like to learn about all the theories and doctrines, but they forget about the importance of the Vinaya, the rules, the moral conduct that the Buddha taught us. And then those are the basics and foundation. After that, we progress to the medium and more advanced topics, such as the Abhidhamma, and the specialized topics, such as the Madhyamaka and the consciousness only, or the Chan school teachings, and so forth. So when it comes to learning the Dharma, I'm personally biased, and I would always say the more the better. But for your own approach, take it at your own speed, but definitely try to learn more. More is better in this case, rather than less. Now, some people think that the Buddha Dharma's emphasis is on cultivation, and they actually don't see much use or benefit in listening to and learning the Dharma extensively. Now, of course, extensive learning in the form of simply accumulating knowledge without the corresponding practice is not a good outcome for a true practitioner. Our learning of the Dharma must be balanced with practice. But without learning and listening to the Dharma teachings, we actually have no clue about how to practice, and we will certainly not gain any of the benefits that can come from practicing the Dharma. So in this case, a prominent example is Venerable Ananda. Now, Venerable Ananda was one of the Buddha's great disciples, and he was renowned for his learning of the Dharma. However, during the Surangama assembly, Venerable Ananda was unable to avoid the trap of Matangi. Now, do you all know this story? So this story can be found in the Surangama Sutra, and it goes like this. At one time, Ananda entered a village seeking alms on his own, and he went from door to door without any discrimination. So in his practice of compassion and equality, no matter whether the donor was wealthy or poor, noble or from a lower caste, Ananda wanted to offer everyone the same opportunity to make dana or make an offering to the Sangha. And he wanted to treat everybody equally, just as the Buddha and the other arahats do. So while on his alms round in this particular village, he came across a brothel. And because he didn't discriminate, he also approached, knocked on the door, had his alms bowl there. However, in that particular brothel, there was a young lady, Matangi, and she was one of Ananda's admirers. So Ananda was said to be very handsome, and even as a monk, in his robes and so forth, he was still very attractive, and Matanga was one of his admirers. And she actually tried to use a spell to try and seduce him. And Ananda actually did fall under the spell. So in the sutra, it tells us that Ananda was on the verge of breaking the precept of purity. Fortunately, the Buddha knew about this, and immediately he emitted a radiant light from the crown of his head. And in that light, a precious lotus appeared with a Buddha sitting on top. And that Buddha revealed a special mantra. Now, Manjushri Bodhisattva was then told to use that mantra to go and save Ananda from danger and to bring both Ananda and Matangi back to see the Shakyamuni Buddha. Now, upon hearing this special mantra, the river of lust in Matangi's mind dried up completely, and she attained the third fruition of arahatship, which is called anagamin, or non-returner. And because of this, the spell that she had cast also then dried up, and Ananda was released from the spell. So from this story, we can see that Ananda was unable to withstand the love spell. And the reason being was because he had not tamed all of his desires. Now, Manjushri, the Bodhisattva representing wisdom, was sent to protect and save him and Matangi. And this symbolizes, or this points out to us, how wisdom is needed to overcome our defilements and desires. Now, some of you may or may not know, Venerable Ananda was the Buddha's personal attendant, and he stayed by the Buddha's side up until the Buddha entered Paranirvana. So having the good fortune of being in the Buddha's presence for several decades, Venerable Ananda still had not attained arahatship by the time the Buddha had entered Paranirvana. Now remember, Venerable Ananda is considered the disciple to have heard the most sutras, the most teachings from the Buddha directly. However, his overemphasis on extensive learning of the Dharma compared to commensurate cultivation of the path meant he had not tamed all defilements. And this was a weakness that allowed Matangi to use the spell on him in the first place. Now here, some people use this story to say, you see, learning too much Dharma is no good. But we must stress, the problem here is with the overemphasis on extensive learning without the commensurate practice. The problem is not with the learning of the Dharma itself. And the sacred scriptures teach us that to cultivate and practice the Buddha Dharma, we have to learn the Dharma. So remember that wisdom is needed to overcome our defilements, and wisdom cannot be attained without learning. So it is through learning the Dharma that we know about cyclic existence and the possibility of ending cyclic existence. It is through learning the Dharma that we know about the Pure Lands, such as Amitabha's Pure Land of bliss in the West, and the Medicine Buddha's Pure Land in the East, and so forth. It is through learning that we know where we are and what the next step is if we want to advance on the path. And it is through learning that we can develop the ability to discern what are the proper Dharma teachings and what are the false Dharma teachings, and so forth. If we do not engage in listening to and learning the Dharma teachings, we would not even know about taking refuge in the Triple Gem. And the fact that you all are here at this retreat indicates you know the importance of learning the Dharma. And hopefully the material covered in these few lessons over the next 4 days can help you to understand better the meaning and purpose of learning the Dharma. And you can share this with others as well when the conditions arise. So in chapter 2, we begin with the first verse, and it summarizes the benefits of learning the Dharma. And so the verse says, "From learning, one knows about all Dharmas. From learning, one can avoid all unwholesomeness. From learning, one can end meaningless activities. From learning, one can attain nirvana." So this verse is found in the scriptures as well, and it praises the virtues of learning the Dharma. Essentially, this verse is telling us that all the virtues to be gained from the Buddha Dharma arises from learning the Dharma. Now, this highlights the importance of learning the Dharma if we want to gain the benefits and cultivate the virtues and merits that we read about in the Dharma. Now, over these next 4 days, you've got a bit of homework to do. So I would like you to copy down each of the verse as we go. So for those of you who are writing it down now, I'll give you some time. For those of you who haven't copied it down, please get pen and paper or open a Word page in your computer and copy down this verse. So each time we come across a verse, I'll give you some time to copy down the verse. And your homework over these next few lessons, as you listen to the teachings about the verses, and the teachings will go through and explain the verses in more detail. What I want on the last day is to then discuss the structure of chapter 2 to help you see the beauty and the depth underlying Venerable Yin-Shun's teachings. And this is another way to help you remember the teachings better so that it's not forgotten easily. And this is a training that we have been taught in Buddhist college. When we read through a particular text, we need to also start to break down the text, sometimes sentence by sentence, sometimes paragraph by paragraph, to decipher the underlying structure. A good writer, when they plan their teaching, the underlying structure also is an important source of information for us in terms of what are the key points, what do we need to learn, and what do we need to practice, and so forth. Okay, so over these few lessons, based on the verses we will go through, there are 12 verses in total. We will learn how to understand the underlying structure of Venerable Yin-Shun's teachings and how we can take that structure to then become a guide for our practice as well. So has everyone finished copying down this particular verse?
You can also screenshot it, so that's maybe a little faster.
That's cheating. That defeats the purpose, because when you actually write, yes, it helps you keep it into your mind. Okay.
Screenshot a copy later.
Okay.
Anybody have
Okay.
that?
Anyone need more time?
I'm done.
Okay. All right. If Faye's done, I'll assume everyone's done then. Okay. So concerning the learning of the Dharma, the Bodhisattva Nagarjuna says that there are 3 sources from which we can learn the Dharma. One is from the Buddha himself. The other is from the Buddha's disciples. And the third is from the scriptures, the teachings that the Buddha had taught. Now, learning the Dharma from the Buddha and his disciples means to personally listen to their verbal discourses. And so the sutra says, in this land, the true body of Dharma arises from listening to pure sounds. So in this land refers to the world we live in, samsara, and listening to pure sounds. Pure sounds here refers to the spoken Dharma teachings given by the Buddha and his disciples. So the Dharma is being described as pure, having a sense of purity and wholesomeness. So it is through the verbal discourses that the whole body of the Dharma teachings was slowly revealed to us by the Buddha and his disciples. Now, unfortunately, in our present time, we can no longer learn directly from the Buddha himself. But we are still fortunate in that we can learn from the Buddha's disciples, namely the present Sangha members that are still with us today. But we also have the scriptures which contain the Buddha's teachings, which have been preserved and made accessible to us. Now, in this respect, we should hold deep appreciation to the past masters and all the people who have put in effort to preserve the Dharma teachings and pass it down to us. And therefore, when you yourself come across the opportunity to contribute to preserving the Dharma teachings for future generations, please seize that opportunity to do so. This is not only a great way to gain merits and virtues for yourself, but it's also a wonderful way to repay the kindness of all beings through sharing the Dharma. Now, although in our current world, Shakyamuni Buddha is no longer with us, according to the Mahayana teachings, there are Buddhas in the 10 directions presently teaching the Dharma. And examples are the Medicine Buddha in the East and the Amitabha Buddha in the West. Now, ordinarily, we are unable to personally hear these Buddhas' verbal discourses, unless, of course, our cultivation has reached a very advanced level, such that we can hear or attend those Dharma teachings. But nonetheless, the amount of scriptures, treatises, and commentaries that we have available, I'm sure, is more than enough to keep us busy in this life. And when we learn the Dharma from the scriptures, we are, in fact, relying on the ancient masters as our teacher. So that means we develop our understanding of the Dharma from reading the scriptures, from reading the teachings that these masters have left behind for us. And therefore, listening to the verbal discourses of the Buddha's disciples and reading the Buddha scriptures are actual ways that we can learn the Dharma. And if we want to practice the Buddha Dharma, then listening to and learning the Dharma has to be the starting point. If someone asks you, why should I learn the Dharma? What's in it for me? are you able to give them a concise answer, a structured answer? If you struggle, then the rest of this teaching will help you to give them the answer. After learning this teaching, you can then also tell these people who ask you this question that the virtues from the Dharma, the virtues that we gain from listening and learning the Dharma are actually quite immense, but they can be categorized into 4 major groups. So the first group of benefit is that one can know about all Dharmas. And that means from listening to the Buddha Dharma, from listening to the Dharma teachings, we are able to know about all things, all Dharmas. So what's the meaning of all Dharmas? The word Dharma in the Buddhist context can have various meanings depending on what it's used for. And here in particular, when we say we can come to know about all Dharmas, the word Dharma should be interpreted to mean things or phenomena. So all Dharmas or all things refer to learning about things that we are considered as wholesome and unwholesome activities. And we learn about things that are conditioned and unconditioned phenomena. And we learn about things such as karma and dependent co-arising and so forth. So it is through listening and learning the Dharma that we can know about all of these things, all of these aspects which affect our life and which will affect our future. So when we know what we should practice and accumulate, then we have a direction, then we have something to guide us. And what we know is harmful or unwholesome, then that also guides us as to what we should discard in terms of our behavior, our ways of thinking, our actions and speech and so forth. So all of these come from learning. Now, in addition, the word Dharma in this particular context can also include the meaning of wholesomeness. And wholesomeness here is in the sense of being in accord with the truth. So the word Dharma can also refer to the truth in certain contexts. After listening to the Buddha Dharma, we will be able to know about all sorts of wholesome Dharmas, all sorts of wholesome things and phenomena. And we can rely on such understanding to then learn and cultivate the path to liberation. Now, because the Buddha Dharma is so vast and profound, learning the Dharma is not something that can be accomplished in a few lessons or a few years of a Buddhism course. There are some people who study Buddhism just out of interest or for academic purposes, and so they think that completing a course here and there or specializing in some subjects makes them proficient in Buddhism. And then, they'll stand up and declare their authority even. And perhaps for their interest or purpose, that is all they need. But if you want to be a true practitioner of the path, if you really want to gain the true benefits of learning the Dharma, then you need to understand that the learning and practice is a lifelong training. The more you learn, the more you will realize there's actually much more to learn. And you should actually become more and more humble. If the opposite happens, the more you learn, the more you think you know, and a bit of pride and arrogance starts to develop, then you need to reflect on that and realize that something is not quite right with your practice. So knowing about all dharmas is the first group of benefit that comes from listening to and learning the Buddha Dharma. The second type of benefit gained from listening to and learning the Buddha Dharma is that we can avoid all sorts of unwholesome deeds. So unwholesomeness here includes things such as our visible and our invisible behavior. So visible, of course, refers to actions and speech that other people can see, hear, and know about. Invisible refers to our inner thoughts, which others cannot see and do not know about. Now, unwholesomeness refers to behaviors that do not accord with the truth, behaviors that bring harm to oneself and others. Unwholesomeness refers to behaviors that nurture ignorance and defilement and keeps us in cyclic existence. So after listening to the Dharma, we will know what is unwholesome and what are the results of such unwholesome deeds. Then we can end the unwholesomeness in our minds and stop such unwholesome mental activities from developing further into actions and speech. And in this respect, when we learn the Dharma, it means we also learn about the precepts, the Vinaya. The rules or the precepts that the Buddha prescribed are to guide us towards wholesomeness and to help us cease unwholesomeness. We should look upon the precepts as our protective armor to help us progress on the path and not regress. Some people think about the precepts as like shackles that bind us and prevent us from doing this and that. But that's the wrong way to approach the precepts. We need to understand the Buddha would not prescribe things that are harmful to us. The Buddha's Vinaya, the teachings in the Vinaya and the precepts are there to protect us and help us progress. So I've got one more. Okay. Now, the third group of benefits from listening to and learning the Dharma is that we can tame and end all sorts of meaningless activities. Here, meaningless has a special definition. It relates to progression on the path of practice to liberation. So if something is meaningful, that means it is conducive to our progression on the path, while meaningless means it is not conducive and may even be detrimental to our progression on the Buddha path. And to clarify this, there are some non-Buddhist practitioners who also seek liberation, but they have chosen to embark on a path of cultivation using a different approach or a different method. An example are some extreme ascetic practices. And, even if you look up YouTube nowadays, you will hear about certain practices, particularly that are still alive and well in India. So some examples of these ascetic practices include extreme fasting. Some choose to never lie down when they're sleeping. Some choose to not wear any clothes, no matter what the weather, cold or hot. There are some who raise one hand up in the air all their lifetime, and they never let it down, not even for a moment. And so effectively, they never use this hand for anything else. And then there are some practices where they only eat decayed human bodies. And there are many other types of ascetic practices that still occur today in India. Now, these practitioners believe that such ascetic practices can lead them to liberation. And these people practice as such, and they teach their followers to also undertake these practices. Now, these forms of extreme ascetic practices, the Buddha described them as meaningless in that they are ineffective in terms of the goal of reaching liberation. And they are simply activities that inflict suffering on oneself. Now, of course, these people will tell you that such extreme practices can help them to tame their mind, and they may even gain certain levels of meditative concentration. But nonetheless, such results cannot develop wisdom, and wisdom is what is needed if one wants to end defilement and attain liberation. Now, in addition, from the Bodhisattva perspective, when one mortifies their body in extreme ways, it reduces their ability to undertake bodhisattva deeds to benefit others. So it is through listening and learning from the Buddha's discourses about the righteous Dharma that we will understand what is beneficial and what is unbeneficial when it comes to the progression on the path. And so naturally, if we want to progress, we will then know to distance ourselves from meaningless practices. So this means we can embark on the right path of cultivation and not fall into the trap of some non-Buddhist beliefs. Now, given the time, we've got one more benefit. So I'll cover this and then we'll take our 10-minute break. Okay. So the fourth group of benefit is that we can attain nirvana. And only from listening to and learning the Buddha Dharma will we know to practice. And we will know to practice the right path that is in accord with the truth. And if we practice the right path, it will eventually lead to the attainment of liberation and nirvana. So the liberation that we attain following what the Buddha taught us is true liberation, and not just an extremely long life in the heavenly realm. So in summary, when we learn the Dharma, we will first come to know about all Dharmas, all things. Now, with this precious knowledge, we can then practice to end all unwholesome activities and deeds. And then through learning, we can develop our understanding and identify what practices are helpful for our spiritual progression. And so we can tame and eventually end engagement in meaningless practices. And finally, through learning and undertaking the right practices, ultimately we can attain true liberation. Therefore, I hope you can see that all the virtues of the Buddha Dharma are gained on account of listening to and learning the Dharma. So I'll leave the next screen on for those who want to copy the next verse. And we'll take our 10-minute break now, and I'll see you all again in 10 minutes. Okay, so now we come to verse number 2. So this next verse highlights the approach or the mentality that we should have when we're listening to the Dharma. And it says, like a vessel that holds water, like sowing seeds in the earth, one should avoid 3 faults and listen attentively, contemplate properly, and bear in mind. Now, when the Buddha gives discourses on the Dharma, he always instructs the audience to listen attentively, contemplate properly on the teachings, and bear them in mind. Now, if one were to listen to the Dharma, but does not put it into practice, then one will not reap the virtues and benefits from listening to and learning the Dharma. And there are 3 faults that we should avoid while we're listening to the Dharma. And these can be explained using the simile of a vessel and the simile of planting seeds. So the first simile is a vessel of some sort that can collect water when it rains, such as a bowl, cup, tub, bucket, and so forth. And the aim of collecting rainwater is for drinking and survival. To successfully collect rainwater, there are 3 faults that we must avoid. The first fault is to place the vessel upside down. And so, in this case, rainwater can never collect inside the vessel at all. The second fault is using a vessel that is not clean, such as a vessel that is tainted with impurities or toxic substances. Now, in this situation, even though rainwater is collected, the water is not only useless, but can also be harmful if we drink it. And the third fault is using a vessel that has cracks. In this situation, even though the vessel is clean and the water is collected and is free from toxicities, that water will eventually seep away through the cracks. So using this vessel simile, it reflects the situation of listening to the Dharma. The first situation of an inverted vessel is where one lacks attention and focus while they're listening to Dharma teachings. So we can think back to the days in school or university or college where perhaps you were sleepy or preoccupied with something else. So although you physically attended the class and supposedly heard the teachings and the lecture, how much of it, if any, did you retain? So in the same vein, when we listen to Dharma teachings, we should try our best to be in a good physical state and have an alert mental state that wants to hear the Dharma. So this means we must not let ourselves be too tired or busy or rushed that we physically become fatigued or mentally inattentive. So when you're studying the Dharma at home, you should also try to prepare yourself to receive the Dharma. Now, as an example, when I listen to Dharma teachings on YouTube, I always make sure that I'm in a good state of mind. I feel alert and energetic, but I'm not overexcited with other things. So for my routine, I tend to do some meditation and recite the compassion mantra for about 30 to 40 minutes before I then sit down and listen to the Dharma teachings online. For me, I find this is presently the most effective way to prepare myself to receive a Dharma lesson. Now, I'm not saying you all have to do the same thing and meditate for 30 or 40 minutes, or that you have to chant the compassion mantra. But what you do need to do is to find a method that helps you, that suits you. It could be maybe some walking meditation, or you could do some chanting, depending on what mantra or sutra you like to chant, or some light exercise. You could even just simply wash your face to freshen up. And in some cases, you may even want to take a power nap. But the aim of it is to prepare yourself physically and mentally to be in a state where you're fresh, awake, and delighted to hear the Dharma. And for each person, you'll have to go through a process of trial and error to find out what works for you. And these methods may also change as your lifestyle changes as well. But remember, the aim is to prepare yourself, to tell your body and your mind that the Dharma is coming. Be ready to receive it. Now, the second situation is a vessel that is not clean. Now, this is where one may pay attention during the Dharma classes, but one also holds biased views, doubts, or has some erroneous attachments to certain things. Now, these views, doubts, and erroneous attachments are like impurities and toxic substances that can taint the wholesome Dharma teachings that are being given. So in this situation, although the teaching that the teacher provides are wholesome and correct, due to one's own impurities, those teachings can become misunderstood or misinterpreted. And instead of gaining benefits and virtues, one may end up developing wrong views and behaviors. And in the extreme, they may even become adverse to the Buddha Dharma and begin to defame it. Now, this is more often seen in some newcomers who may have done some self-study of Buddhism themselves, and even those raised in so-called Buddhist families who have learnt about Buddhism from their parents, who in turn had learnt about various Buddhist facts from their parents or elders and so forth. So sometimes, what you learn from the grapevine is not actually correct, but because you think that's correct, when you hear the Dharma for the first time properly and it goes against what you know, you then start to question it and have doubts about the teacher's credibility. So an example was when I was young. So I grew up in a Buddhist family, and I always thought Buddha was Chinese. The Buddha statue we have, the Buddha looks Chinese. And I never knew back then, back in primary school, that Buddha was from India. So I would even argue black and blue with others that Buddha was Chinese. So fortunately for me, now I'm not in primary school, and I have learnt the Dharma from good teachers, and I know that Buddha came from India. So even minor things like that, minor misunderstanding or preconceived ideas, can get one really stuck when you hear teachings that are contrary to what you thought was correct. But either way, the important thing is, if you have doubts, seek clarification with an earnest and wholesome mind. Now, the third situation is using a vessel that is cracked. So in this situation, one has no incorrect views and the mind is not inattentive, so water is collected. However, there is the inability to retain that teaching. So the crack implies that water will soon seep out. So what we have heard will soon be forgotten. And this is actually probably the most common scenario for many of us. So don't think that this is bad. Don't beat yourself down on it, because this is something that we all experience. And it's a matter of recognizing the situation, and then we look for ways to try and maintain and strengthen our memory of what we have learned. Now, this can be through review or listening to the teachings several times, or taking detailed notes and going over them every now and again, or to draw up tables, charts, and diagrams to try and link together the different teachings that you have heard about. And so that's why for this particular year, I've given you the task and the homework over these few lessons to copy down the verses and to take more detailed notes so that hopefully it will help you maintain or retain more of what you've learned over these few days. And then later in the day, you can also, when you have some free time, tomorrow for you guys, you'll be going to bed soon after all these lectures. But when you have some free time, reflect on what you've heard from both Si Fa Si this morning, myself, and Venerable Tang Si as well, and see how much of it you can recall. And doing this regularly can help you embed the Dharma into your long-term memory. So in this respect, I remember back in high school, my history teacher was teaching us ways to put things into our long-term memory. So he was explaining to us that, humans have short-term and long-term memory. And so being a history teacher, he wants us to remember historical dates, historical persons, and so forth. And his method was, when you learn something, you read it once, and then 5 minutes later, you read it again. And then 5 minutes later, you read it again. And you do that a few times. And then you extend that time to maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, and you read it again. So you spend pretty much a whole day just doing that repeatedly. And that helps to embed those facts into your long-term memory. So that's just another way of doing things, which is similar to the earlier point about reviewing what you have learned regularly. So naturally, if one listens to the Dharma teachings with any of these three faults, then one will not be able to gain the benefits and virtues that are contained in the Dharma, because we don't remember the teachings. Therefore, it is said that one should listen attentively to the Dharma, contemplate properly on the Dharma, and skillfully bear in mind the Dharma teachings. So that is the first simile of using a vessel. The other simile to remind us of these three faults to avoid when listening to the Dharma is that of sowing seeds in the earth. So the first is, if we are spreading seeds on rocks, or in our modern times, spreading seeds on concrete pathways, on bitumen roads, then we'll never be able to see those seeds sprout and grow. The second fault is if we sow seeds in a very weedy location. And in this situation, even though the seeds may sprout, it will not be able to grow strong and may even wither and die quite quickly. And the third fault is sowing seeds simply on the surface. Now, in this situation, even if the soil is fertile and the location is weed-free, the seeds can soon be eaten by birds. So if you notice, this simile is more from the aspect of the result. Can we see growth, flowering, and reap the fruit from what we sow? Whereas the previous simile is from the causal stage of how we're learning. And each time when I read about this third fault of sowing seeds on the surface, it always reminds me about my next door neighbor. So for those of you who don't know, where I live is farmland, And all of my neighbours have cows, sheep, goats, horses, and so forth. Now, every year, my neighbour tills the field and sows a lot of millet seeds. And their aim is to grow a whole field of millet so that their sheep can graze in May when they have their little lambs. However, each time after they sow the seeds, I find that the field immediately turns white. Now, do you know why it turns white? The white comes from the native sulfur-crested cockatoos. So there's a picture of them for you to see. So these cockatoos are native to Australia, and by their name, you may or may not see the little crest on their head is yellow. So they're called sulfur-crested cockatoos. Now they come in a large flock and spend a lot of time eating the millet seeds that my neighbour has just sown. So the field turns white. And these cockatoos are actually quite bossy as well. So you don't see any of the other birds come. But after they leave, the field then turns into a pink grey. And I've got a picture of the galah, which is the next bird, the next flock of birds that come to eat the seeds. So often you'll find that after my neighbour has sown the seed, come May, the field of millet that he was expecting is actually quite sparse and not as rich and thick as it could have been had he had sown the seeds into the earth. Now, for those of you who enjoy gardening, you will know that if seeds are sown in any of these three ways, it's no real surprise if you don't get a good harvest. So this is another tactful way of teaching us what not to do when listening to the Dharma if we want some good results. Learning the Dharma is the cause, and experiencing the good outcomes, such as attaining virtues and ultimately attaining liberation, these are the results. And when we listen to the Dharma or read the scriptures, we are conditioning ourselves through hearing and learning. In other words, we are creating the Dharma seeds, the causes that can help us to progress on the path and eventually attain transcendence. But if we do not approach our learning properly, then the sprouting and attainment of the final fruit will still be beyond our reach. So when listening to the Dharma, if one does not pay attention and absorb the teachings properly, or if one absorbs the teachings but mixes it with their own unwholesome ideas, or if one absorbs the teachings with a wholesome mind but forgets the teachings soon after, then in such cases the act of listening to the Dharma will not bear any fruits. Therefore, to gain benefits from listening to the Dharma, we must avoid these three faults. So that means one should listen and learn the Dharma correctly, contemplate the Dharma properly, and always bear the Dharma teachings in mind. Okay, so now we come to the third verse, and the third verse continues to explain to us the attitude that we should have when we're listening to the Dharma and receiving the Dharma. And this verse says, "View of being ill, seeking a doctor and taking medicine. View of earnestly undergoing treatment for severe illness. After listening to the Dharma, practice according to what one hears. The Buddha says the Dharma is like a mirror. Here, Venerable Yin-Shun adopts the common simile of a doctor-patient relationship to help us understand our respective positions and responsibilities. So I'll give you some time to copy this down, and then we'll move on. Are we good to go? Faye, have you finished? I'll continue on, and if you need to go back to this, I can show you the slides again once the lesson is over.
Okay, done.
So the Sakyamuni Buddha says that sentient beings have three kinds of physical and psychological illnesses. Now, in terms of our bodies, our physical illness, we experience aging, sickness, and death. And in terms of our minds, our psychological illnesses, we have greed, hatred, and ignorance. Now, the Tathagata was born into this world to help sentient beings treat both of these physical and psychological aspects, the illnesses that we all have. And in other words, the Buddha is the great doctor. The Dharma is the potent and effective medicine, and the Sangha are the nurses. The Triple Gem manifests in this world for the sake of providing effective treatment for our physical and psychological illnesses. And this is truly a pandemic that everyone has become infected with. Therefore, when one listens to the Dharma teachings, one should approach it from the perspective of a patient. As a patient, we should embrace 4 views, and those views are: 1, the view of being ill; 2, the view of having found a great doctor; 3, the view of taking medicine or undergoing treatment; and 4, the view of earnestly undergoing the full treatment. So the first is the view of being ill. Now, often we think of ourselves as invincible, especially when we are young and healthy. Now, for some people, even when they are diagnosed with an illness, they can go into denial. Now, here, the view of being ill is really to be honest with ourselves and look at our shortcomings. Illness, in this context, is referring to both the physical and psychological illnesses that have plagued us since time without beginning. Now, these illnesses have caused us to experience endless suffering, life after life. Now, because we have contracted this illness, we are afflicted by worries and suffering. So our worries, suffering, pain, etc., these are the symptoms of being sick. This situation of having a serious illness is something we should learn to recognize and accept. If we do not recognize or we don't accept that we have an illness, then we will not seek treatment. And even though we know we are ill, we can also decide, if we decide to not seek treatment and deny and continue to deny that we are ill, what we're actually doing is reducing our affinity with the Buddha Dharma. We're not actually creating an affinity with the Buddha Dharma. When we accept that we are ill and we want to seek treatment, then we're actually nurturing the affinity with the Buddha Dharma. So here, I'd like to share with you my experience. So as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who did hear, and for those of you who wasn't here, I was watering my veggie patch back in March, and I stepped into a hole and I fell over and broke my ankle and shin bone. But I was in denial about how serious it was. I thought, oh, it's nothing big, just a sprained ankle. So all I did was call my brother, can you bring me some crutches? I need to use some crutches for the next few days. And I just assumed the swelling and pain would go away, and took a few painkillers, and then I'd be back on my feet in a week or so. But once my brother, who's a doctor, he came down with the crutches and he had a look, and he immediately told me I had to go and get x-rays and an MRI. And the results of the x-rays showed that I had broken 4 bones in my ankle and leg, and I had ruptured 3 tendons as well. So it was considered a very serious injury. And my brother said, I'm looking at 6 months in a cast. So even with such an obvious and severe injury, I procrastinated in terms of seeking treatment. I kept telling myself, oh, it's nothing, it'll get better in a few weeks. So, so I need to practice what I preach, and I did. I went and I sought proper treatment, and I'm still undergoing treatment for the broken ankle at the moment. So for most ordinary people, sometimes we just accept this is life, it has its ups and downs, it's not perfect. And people, without having learned about the Dharma, they don't realize that the pain and suffering are actually symptoms of an illness. And life, the sufferings we endure and experience in life, are actually signs telling us that we are sick. So therefore, people who don't know that they are ill, they won't seek a cure. They think that life is just like this. There is no cure. There is no illness in the first place. But for us as practitioners, the Buddha is telling us we need to hold this view that this cyclic existence is a severe illness that affects us physically and psychologically. So this is the first view we should have, and we should consider ourselves as a patient with an illness, and therefore look for the appropriate treatment. So the second view is the view of a great doctor. Now, when we have a medical problem, we go and see a doctor. However, the illnesses causing us the sufferings of life and death is not an illness that an ordinary doctor can diagnose, let alone treat successfully. But we should know, or we should hold the view, that there are great doctors out there who can diagnose and treat this illness that we have caught. Now, who are these great doctors? They are no other than the Buddha and his disciples. These Dharma teachers are the great doctors who can treat this illness that has infected everyone. Now, knowing that these Dharma teachers are the great doctors who can help us, we should associate with such good people. We should pay respects to them and make offerings to them. This is just like a patient who trusts and relies on and makes appointment to see their doctor. And importantly, they show up for those appointments. Now, the third is the view of taking medicine. When we are ill and find a good doctor, the illness is not treated just like that without medicine. The doctor can only diagnose the problem and prescribe treatment and medication, but it's not enough to treat our illness. To truly treat the illness, we must take the medicine and follow the course of treatment prescribed. So this applies to the Dharma teachers as well. Dharma teachers can only tell us the methods of practice, but we ourselves must rely on the Dharma medicine and apply it in order to treat the severe illness that has infected both our body and minds. If we listen to the Dharma and treat it as pure knowledge, that would be the same as only reading the medicine prescription without buying the medicine and taking it. So in this situation, even if the medicine was the elixir of life and could give you longevity, it would be useless because you're merely looking at it without taking it. So just as the Buddha says in the King of Samadhi Sutra, though I have expounded this sublime, wholesome Dharma, if you hear it but do not practice it, then it is like a sick person in possession of good medicine but does not take it, in which case their illness will never be cured. So again, back to my experience with my broken ankle, I was given pain relief medicine after the ankle reconstruction surgery. But because I didn't feel any pain, I thought I could skip it. But the reason I didn't feel any pain was due to the residual effects of the anesthetic from the surgery. Now, once that residual effect wore off, I was in a world of pain, and I had to immediately resume my pain relief medication. And even then, it took a good hour or so before it started to kick in. So at times in our practice, when we're very energetic and we go full speed ahead, it can actually wear us out. And we then think, oh, I'm practicing pretty well, or we might even overestimate our achievement. And as a result, we can become misguided, or we can misjudge our actual situation. So when we take our medicine, when we're practicing the Dharma, there is a prescribed dosage that we should stick to. Too much, it'll make us sick. Too little, it is ineffective as a treatment. So when we're learning the Dharma and practicing it, instead of racing ahead, burning out, and then having to start again, it's better to adopt a balanced approach so that you go forward in a steady manner. Now, I know I've gone a bit over time, but I'll just finish off with the fourth view, and then we can end today's lesson. So the fourth is the view of earnestly undergoing treatment for severe illness, which is where one views the great illness of life and death as a severe illness. not something that's minor that can be fixed simply with a pill or two. Here, what we must understand is that a severe illness requires long-term treatment. There is no magic medicine, no quick fix that can cure us overnight. So this means we actually have to prepare ourselves both mentally and physically for an extended duration of treatment. Now, given that we have already met with a great doctor and have access to the right medicine, we must continually take this Dharma medicine and follow the treatment plan for it to be effective. Now, sadly, there are some people who want immediate results. You know, everything nowadays is fast food, fast this, fast that. And consequently, after practicing for a short while, or even practicing for a few years, and if they see no effective result or progression, particularly in terms of gaining liberation from this severe illness, they can start to lose hope and even become lazy or disheartened. So if one has such an attitude where they lack the courage and diligence to practice for the long term and just want, you know, a fast result, then it'll be very hard to actually gain any benefits from practicing the Dharma. So when we're learning the Buddha Dharma, we should understand that it's not merely to gain knowledge, to gain facts, and nor should we approach it as simply a form of entertainment to kill time or as an interest or hobby. Learning the Buddha Dharma is to help us understand clearly that we have an illness, that we must seek a good doctor and undergo the effective treatment. So after listening to the righteous Dharma teachings, we should make the resolution to diligently practice according to what we have learned. Okay, given the time, I think we will end here and we'll continue with the rest of this topic about seeking treatment tomorrow. Okay, and I'll see you all tomorrow.